Hi, Rachel.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Great, thanks. Thank you for joining.
Sure.
So just to let you know, the recording starts the moment I open the Zoom. So we're just waiting on the other panelists to join.
No problem.
Hi, Shandana.
Hi. Kelly, you might need to, in case any of the panelists don't join with the panel link, you might just want to bump them up to panelists.
I will, no problem. I was just letting Rachel know the recording started, so we're just waiting on the other panelists to join.
Yeah. Hi, Rachel.
Good morning, afternoon. How are you?
Good. How are you? Oh,
I'm quite well.
love your blazer.
Thank you. I'm about to start my first cup of coffee, so hopefully it kicks in a meaningful time frame.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, the only thing is we have a couple of attendees. That's fine. They can hear us right now, but it's okay. We're just getting orientated. Hi, Philip.
Hi, Chandana. Hi, Rachel.
Hey, Philip, how are you?
I'm good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Is it the three of us plus Neve?
I'm here in place of Neve today, but I'm using her Zoom. It's Kelly. How are you, Philip?
Hi, Kelly. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Kelly in stealth mode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only a different name, but also she's using the Health Excel logo to
I know.
obfuscate her tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Elisa unfortunately can't make this call because she has a bit of a migraine, she said so, but it's fine. We're set.
Can you hear me okay, by the way? Is my sound all right?
Yep.
Great.
Hi, Chris.
Good morning.
Hi.
How's the construction at your place, Chris?
Sorry.
How's the construction at your place?
I had a friendly chat to tell him to not do anything for the next hour, so we should be good. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm still sorry to hear that. You still get a lot of banging around in your normal life, though.
Yeah, it's all directly upstairs.
Sounds like the sort of friendly chat I had with my children just now to be hopefully quiet for the next hour.
I should probably tell my partner. He's not too far from a child sometimes.
Slightly veiled threats, some smiles.
Yeah, I suspect you can't bribe with sweets though, right? I said there might be an ice
You don't
cream.
know him.
No.
If you're good, you'll get ice cream. I'll tell him that.
My retired neighbors, and it's a really nice sunny day today. So they're just sitting in the backyard, and it's just right next door to where I'm sitting, blasting 80s music, lying on a lounger. I'm like, this is the life, but I had to shut the windows.
Please
Hello.
keep Pat Benatar to yourself for the next hour.
Hi, Erwin.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Erwin.
For all of you on the attendees, please bear with us a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for a couple more panelists to join us, and then we'll get started. Hi, Tim.
Hello. How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you?
Good.
I'm just waiting on Lorcan. Kelly, can you please check if Lorcan's
Yeah, I'm just trying to find them under the attendees.
might have dropped out?
I don't see him unless he dropped off or signed under a different name. Okay, I'm not sure why, but most of the attendees are coming up as my name, so I can't distinguish which one is Larkin.
Lorcan, if you're listening to us, Kelly will send you a separate link and please join us, but maybe we'll get started in the interest of time. Okay. Well, thanks all of you for joining our webinar today, which is focused on the launch of our guidance document that looks at how to evaluate digital health vendors in the context of bringing them or using them in a clinical trial. This has been an ongoing endeavor of ours, a collaborative initiative from Health Excel, but we'll talk a little bit more about who the other stakeholders have been in the equation. But we've been working on this for the last 9 or 10 months, and I think we're nearly at the finish line. We're ready to launch this. So we thought we'll set up this webinar to just give all of you a sneak peek at what this entails, why we've done what we've done, and what we'd like back from you in terms of feedback once we put out this open source guidance document out into the world in the next couple of weeks. But before we jump into the specifics, maybe a quick round of intros of all the different participants who were part of our working group that was set up about 10 months ago. We're missing a few of them, but in our document, you'll be able to see everybody else who was an integral part of bringing this together. So I can get started. I'm Chandana, I'm the Chief Medical Officer at Health Excel. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Chassie. I'm the Director of Innovation at the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME.
Philip?
Hi, I'm Philip Russmeyer. I'm the founder and CEO, a company that looks to deliver complete patient-level health safely and efficiently.
Great, welcome. Tim?
I'm Tim Ruck. I'm an Associate Director in the R&D Digital Health Group at AstraZeneca.
Erwin?
Hi, everyone. Rebecca here. I am a Director Innovative Capabilities in J&J's Quality Organization.
Chris?
Hi, everyone. Chris Carson. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Phoebe Health, which is a digital biomarker development platform.
Super. We're also waiting on Lorcan Walsh from Novartis, who unfortunately is
He's just joining the panelist now.
okay, perfect. So there is Lorcan. I'll give him a second. Welcome, Lorcan.
Finally, I've gotten it working. Hi, everyone. I've been listening to you for the last few minutes. Great to be able to join as a panelist. Hi, everyone who's listening. My name is Lorcan Walsh. I am leading the Digital Endpoint Capability Center within the Global Drug Development function in Novartis.
Okay, super. So this group actually represents a working group, which is a segment of our clinical trials community within Health Excel. And Tim, you were one of our founding members who helped put this working group together. And this is a nice opportunity for us to look back and reflect on why we initiated this working group and the objectives that we meant to achieve through this group. Would you like to maybe talk us through our initial thinking?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about digital health, there's the innovation aspect and also the operations or execution aspect. And on the innovation side, there's a lot of room for diversity, for different approaches, for different ideas and competition, and that leads to new ways where people may discover something different that leads to a better way of, say, delivering remote patient monitoring or conducting centralized trials. On the operations or execution side, that variability can be detrimental. And it's a situation, especially when it comes to vendor assessment, where if some parties do vendor assessment in a way that's very inefficient or highly different from another party, it can actually affect everyone in the ecosystem. And so, we realized that in a lot of cases between vendors and sponsors or purchasers of services, we all ask a lot of similar questions, nearly identical topics being covered, because we all have the same accountabilities in terms of ensuring that there's the appropriate level of quality management, compliance with GCP, capacity to support clinical research or care delivery. And so there was an opportunity to reduce the variability, which would allow people on the vendor side to be prepared for the in-depth questions and a showcasing of their quality systems and their operational capacity. And on the vendor side, knowing how to ask or how to respond to questions and interpret answers. And then the whole process, if both parties are aligned, would be less time consuming and less labor intensive because the expectations are the same going into it. And all that would be delivered without compromising the quality of the whole vendor assessment process.
Thank you, Tim. And any comments from any of the other panelists on why you joined this initiative and goals from your point of view?
Sure. So there's so much going on in the world of digital health. There's so many fantastic vendors, some vendors who have yet to be sort of given their time in the sun. And this is a great way for sponsors to vet vendors in a way that's fair for everyone. And also exactly what Tim said, a fair chance for vendors to be able to put up their body of evidence to show why they're great, and also can be really successfully from an operational standpoint in clinical trials. I think this is really useful for everyone in the field, both sponsors and vendors. I'm very excited that we're launching this.
And I'll also say it's probably a nice way to establish some common a common language on the two sides, because a lot of the time vendors end up struggling to meet the requirements or the needs because they tend to be really long, and sometimes the terminology or the specifics are not well understood across the board. So, okay, that's brilliant. And then just a quick, I guess, how we went about, or the approach or the method that we took as a collective on helping build out this guidance framework was really a collaborative effort. So while we set up a bit of a curriculum over a 6 to 8 month period, and we decided what we wanted to touch on every single month. This group has religiously met every single month starting December of last year. And we've done a lot of work on each call, trying to build out the specific elements, but also done a lot of homework in further fleshing out the details. So it has been a really collaborative effort. And just of note as well, based on the intros, we wanted to make sure that this was a diverse and multi-stakeholder group so that we had perspectives from all the different sides of the equation. So you'll see just within this panel, we have Erwin and Tim and Lorcan, who represent pharmaceutical companies who would be sending out these assessments to vendors they're seeking for their trials. but at the same time, we have Phil and Chris, who would be those that might be filling out these assessments. So we got that perspective as well in terms of what is feasible and what makes sense. And of course, Rachel from DIME, they're always the front runners in terms of establishing guidance and policy around these areas. So that was really kind of the approach we took, which was a collaborative initiative. There was inputs from everybody. And once we had completed about 6 to 8 months of collective work, we sent this off for peer review as well to both pharma as well as a vendor, so that we got a fresh pair of eyes to look at it. And we came back together as a group to further bulk out the document. And what we'll do over the next, say, 20 minutes is actually outline all the different categories that we have included in our guidance. And we'll each talk through the different categories and a quick sort of top line definition of what it includes and what it entails. This is just to give everybody a flavor for the types of things that we have considered as part of this vendor assessment guidance. And after that, we'll talk a little bit about where to find this guidance, how to use it, how we've created it to be quite flexible, and really happy to take questions from anybody along the way or towards the end as well. I might really quickly bring up an image just to give us a sense of the categories that we're looking at. So we have 13, and we're gonna talk through each of these in a short amount of detail. So maybe we'll kick off with number 1, which is general organizational operation and products. So can I call to you, Erwin, to tell us a little bit about number 1?
Absolutely, Chandana. So number 1 is really, I would say, to get a general orientation about a digital health vendor. Yeah, so it's going to ask for things like vendor size, location, expertise, also financial health. So why it matters, I think, to be asking about these general organizational operation and products is really to understand from the start the full scope of a supplier. I mean, you want to be just sure that, let's say, when as a farm company, I'm procuring a service or a solution, that I'm going to work with a trustworthy business partner. Yeah. So that is why what is the second topic. Maybe I can take right away the second one, Chandana, on quality management, because that really talks about the quality management system. And so on the one hand, I would say that in our survey, we're looking at it from an internal perspective. So how is the QMS organized? What are the types of quality assurance? How are training and procedures being managed? But also, I think the outside perspective is very, very relevant here, right? So there are questions around compliance with external standards like ISO, or compliance with GDPR, for instance. And I think it also helps a bit to understand, especially when looking at very novel vendors, to understand, well, how well established their quality function already is. Yeah. And for new suppliers, it actually may also show the importance of what we are looking at from a sponsor perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you. Rachel, over to you for number 3.
Sure. So this section starts with Gxp guidelines. So what applicable Gxp guidelines were followed? What are the key features of the product or service? What are the key features, their purpose, and any kind of system requirements that are needed for that too? We know that if these are being used in a clinical trial, lots of sites will have different systems. So what's required to get them really started to use the product well? This guidance here will also ask about documentation systems, which is very important if a product is ever expected to go in front of a regulatory body. More questions about how our software updates communicated to the sponsor, and things like how our server downtime communicated, how often our server is down, that kind of a thing, to really help with great planning for a successful clinical trial. And then there's also questions about user experience. How does a vendor measure their product's quality? How does a vendor involve end users in their product design? This is one of my favorite questions that's in this entire guidance. This gets to know how does a vendor know their product is actually successful and useful to patients, their families, clinicians, clinics, or whoever the end user might be. We also include a subsection to describe your patient engagement methods. So this actually might be my favorite part of the guideline. How are end users included in design? This is it's an opportunity to showcase really great accessibility work on behalf of the vendor. What languages are their product available in? What demographics has their product been tested in previously? Also lets folks know who they have a body of evidence for and who they have yet to test a product in. What level of tech literacy is required to use this? This section, I believe, really helps separate the great products from the good ones.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Chris, over to you for category 4.
So category 4 really focuses on devices that are used to develop digital biomarkers in the context of trials, and in particular around the logistics and supply chain issues. Things that relate to manufacturing and planning cycles are covered in this section, along with qualification process, whether it's proprietary or a third-party device that may be used to capture data. So within the section, there are diligence questions that relate to, like I said, manufacturing planning cycles, the life cycle of the product, and phase out cycles and how those are managed. There's a third-party vendor for the qualification process that's followed by the vendor to manage that. What are the SOPs? There's also questions that relate to kitting and labeling and developing and reconciling unique device identifiers, and for how these devices are actually distributed and then managed in the cohorts of participants in a given study. How they're tracked, how they're traced, how errors are handled, how device replacements are managed throughout that whole logistical process from beginning to end. And so this is really kind of focused on the devices themselves to the extent that they're used in a clinical trial.
Thank you. Philip, for number 5.
Yeah, sure. So number 5 is all around account provisioning. So we switch a little bit from the devices or the platform to users, and there's 2 key components here. One is all around user account management. So the vendor's approach to user types, for example, their setup, how user accounts are cleaned up and the like, including particularly the efficiency and ease of doing this, because I think there's probably quite a wide spectrum depending on what technology and what processes are applied as to how usefully and easily this is done, particularly from the sponsor's perspective. The second key component is all around security mechanisms to ensure that only approved individuals get access. And here the group elected to emphasize particularly role-based access controls, or RBAC, which is a concept that started in rudimentary form probably 4 or 5 decades ago, but has now been evolved to be distinguished from group-based mechanisms, which actually make it harder to control user permission relationships. And so also actually what RBAC does is it facilitates sessions whereby there's a many-to-many relation among users and permissions. Now, all of this is reasonably dry. So unlike Rachel in her section, I'm not sure any of my favorite questions appear here, but it's pretty important stuff.
Thank you. Rachel, 6.
Sure. Oh, Philip, don't make your section feel bad. So this section here is more about jumping back to sort of the operational kind of real world aspects of having this product available in a clinical trial. And so sometimes there's a difference between how a product is pitched before a contract is signed, thinking about this is a super easy product to use, and to how it exists once you hand over a product to your ClinOps folks, where sometimes ClinOps folks will get something, then they'll look at you and say, yeah, you can't be serious about this. It's an operational nightmare. I happen to still twitch sometimes when I think about the products I've had to operationalize in the clinical trial. This section is to help you not force your colleagues and your patients to twitch like me. And this section helps the sponsor understand exactly what the operational burden is to use a product. So how complicated is a manual for study coordinators, right? That kind of really nitty-gritty understanding. What's the deck look like for a site investigator meeting? Also, what successes has a product had in previous studies? This is a way to capture all of that information. Also want to include that sometimes it's okay for a product or a service to be complicated. I mean, healthcare is complicated, right? But this is to help level set the understanding of burden on sites and patients that needs to be understood from the very beginning from both sides. And this section is to help fully understand that.
Super. Lorcan, 7.
Sure. I fully empathize with you, Rachel, around your experiences in the past. I second some of the good things that you spoke about there. And when we begin to think about, Joe, what happens when we're collecting data during that trials, right? So live trial support for the different stakeholders here. What would be fantastic to be able to have information and to bring it up as part of this. So we're really looking forward to seeing kind of this document come together and being used in practice, is to understand stuff like, what is the level 1, level 2, level 3 trial support that happens? How are those different help desks or whatever mechanisms are used brought together? And is there any KPIs as part of that any vendors that are coming to us have thought about already? What training needs to happen for each of these? Do we, for example, need to come together with additional training to make it work with us? Or how does this work in practice? Additionally, what's good to know during that live trial support is, and this comes back to, I think, some of the comments earlier, are what languages are supported. And suddenly, if our trial grows and it moves to an additional country that we do not have language support for already, how quickly can we get that language support on board? Some of the other things that we need to begin to think about here as well is around some data collection challenges, right? So what happens when there's downtime in a server and data is not coming in? What policies are in place to be able to correct for this? What happens if a sensor that we're using within a study breaks? Is there any mechanisms that are in place already to begin to cater for that? Do we have extra ones on site? Or is it a next day delivery for each of these? What type of experience do the teams have with it? In terms of other things to be, I suppose, thought of here around service level agreements, SLAs, and what we need to think about there in terms of any user activities that need to happen. One of the things that we do need to think about as well is if there's complaints, if there's feedback around any of this, how is that feedback handled? And this can be from various different sides. For example, from a patient side itself, what do we need to think about here if an inspector or a monitor wants to get access to some of those feedback? If there's any adverse events as part of this as well, again, how are they handled, and what is the processes that are in place for that? Lastly, probably from this section as well, is around documentation. What is the end user license agreements? What are the warranties? What are the pieces around that? So it's trying to really have a really clear overview of what happens throughout that kind of live trial setting when we're actually collecting the data. If we jump on to number 8 there as well, we can think about what happens, Joe, after we've last patient, last visit on each of these trials, and we begin to try to look at the closeout activities. So are there any, for example, template data transfer specifications or data transfer agreements that are in place already that we can use to kind of onboard that vendor really quickly into our systems and see, is there a really strong match there? What is the vendor's experience around data reconciliation in the past? And what is their expectations? So those are expectations for any data reconciliation. Other data things to think about here is around data retention. So how long is data kept for? And also under what conditions is that data kept for? And what is the usage policies around that? And then lastly as well, just around the timing, some timing issues for those trial closeout activities. Thanks.
Thank you, Lorcan. For number 9, Philip.
Yeah, so following on from that theme on data handling, here we are explicitly looking at data both within and around digital devices and platforms. And the group spent actually rather a long time on this sensitive topic, and we ended up putting GXP in brackets as we believe that it doesn't actually always exist, which is I guess why something like initiatives like this are seeking to address maybe a move towards standardization. Where we ended up was paying attention particularly to 3 aspects. The first of which is all around the data management. So showing how the data flows, with what data transfer specifications, and especially regarding important regulatory requirements, particularly under the GDPR or HIPAA in the US, and aspects such as anonymization and consent. So as you will have heard already, some of this touches on other sections, and there may sometimes be a little bit of overlap, but I think, again, as per Chandana's guidance at the beginning, we're expecting this to be a guide that people can use in flexible ways, but we thought drawing out some of those aspects here is really important. The second key kind of element of this section is all around the technologies and tools used by the vendor, such as the degree of automation, the integration with third-party systems, and also even whether there are any on-premise elements. Let's hope that's not too often the case, but we covered that eventuality. And then the final section here is all around the data attributes and their review mechanisms. So including critical data elements, the interim and final database log that we all know is very important, but also audit trail logs and the like.
Thank you, Philip. Tim, the device and data section.
Yep, so the devices and data section is one section that will be particularly sensitive to making sure that you have a fairly clear set of intended uses defined at the beginning. We cover things like how the device may be validated, how it integrates into third-party platforms, it handles certain types of data. So the overall aim here is whether or not this can fit into a larger solution and whether it's well controlled, appropriately validated piece of hardware with the firmware and software to support it. So if we start first with sensors, does the sensor do what it needs to? Does the algorithm operate on the data in a way that's appropriate for the intended use case? And is there evidence that you can collect the data you need to in the intended use environment with the intended user? And these sorts of questions will support the inclusion of the devices into a clinical trial under that particular intended use or into care platforms. Moving a level up, we consider the algorithms and how they're controlled, whether they are registered as a piece of medical device and whether they can integrate in a modular way or if there needs to be a different way to access the algorithms. Even if you do have a registered algorithm that could be proprietary, in some cases, access to raw data can be really critical depending on the intended use of the data coming off the device. In some cases, you may need the algorithms to interact with things like personally identifiable information, and that may have an effect on how the data is transformed with the algorithms. So we check to make sure that PII is handled correctly. And then that touches on also a demographics question. Is this intended for use in the general population, or are there special populations that would require other validation for which you have evidence that it is safe and effective for use? Or are there certain demographics of patients who are known to potentially require adjustments to the use of the device? And then moving to the highest level is the integration of the data. How does the device or the services that support the device or the service overall interact or integrate with a decentralized trial management platform or a care management platform?
Thank you. Chris, for 11.
So I'll echo both Philip and Tim in their comments that this is overlapping a bit, or at least cross-referencing some of the prior sections, 9 and 10, but specifically talks about interoperability and integration of the vendor platform, especially in cases where third-party devices or data are also being used or are critical in the development of biomarkers and the data flow. So on one hand, there is a section that deals with device level integration and understanding kind of the product's framework and how it may need to connect to third-party systems, for instance, through APIs or SDKs, and how that data flow works. So again, that references a little bit of section 9 that Philip discussed. Another area is understanding if there are any other data sources that require specific levels of interoperability that may already have defined standards with regard to EMR data in particular, right? If there's clinical data that's being brought in other than what's being generated by a third party or proprietary device that is important for correlation or data models that are being developed. So understanding exactly what that level of interoperability and integration is for that vendor's platform, I think is critical in understanding the overall ecosystem of how things are being developed and managed. In this section, there's also questions with regard to dependencies for the accuracy of calibrations for devices that are being used, especially third parties, as well as any regulation that may be associated with these third-party devices. For example, if there's a medical device display, or if it's considered to be software as a medical device for certain regulatory definitions, especially in the US. It's a bit of a shorter section, but again, it complements, I think, the two prior sections pretty nicely.
Thank you, Chris. The validation section, number 12, to you, Erwin.
Yes, Chandana, and well, maybe surprising to some, this is my favorite section. It's very fun actually that I worked with these people for months and that I learned that everyone has a secret favorite section. But anyway, in this part, we want to understand sort of what type of testing has been done. Yeah, so was it just technical verification in a lab? Was there a study done? What was there analytical or clinical validation of the health solution? And then I think also beyond that, what we're also addressing is sort of, we want to know what is the body of evidence that is already available and that could be used, for instance, in conversations with health authorities. And certainly, if there are any publications that are out there that can be mentioned here as well. And so this section really matters because it helps us to understand, let's say, whether the solution being offered, if that is something very much established or whether it's something still very novel. Yeah, and that may have, I think, all other implications for the implementation.
And Erwin, just to clarify, then in 12, we are not actually building out a validation framework, so to speak, because it exists. We're merely, can you say a bit more about that?
Well, I think we are actually very much leveraging the V3 framework, right? I see Rachel smiling, so I think that is right. So we more or less want to understand, I think, what has been done, let's say, by others in terms of validation. What is sort of the documentation that they can take right away from the shelves? We're not prescribing how they should be doing it. I think that others have done a lot more work in that space already.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I could jump in just for a moment about the V3 framework that Erwin was mentioning. Thanks for the softball there. So the V3 framework is something that DIME has created. And so it will be linked in the eventual guidance document. And I will drop it also in the chat. But it also, so V3 stands for verification, analytical, and clinical validation. It's a framework DIME put together to see how we can take a look at what verification actually means. It means lots of different things to different folks, but it's a guideline to help us figure out what's necessary during a specific conversation.
Thank you. And Philip.
Yeah. Number 30, lucky number 13, last but not least, I would argue cybersecurity. We had a debate around if and where to include cybersecurity. And just to make the case why we explicitly included this section, I think there's lots of interesting stats from around the world that we all know. But when I had a little look, the German government claimed that successful cyber attacks on German health service providers operating critical infrastructure doubled last year. The French media reported almost 30 successful major cyber attacks last year against health institutions. In Spain, you had 50,000 harmful attacks, of which over 350 were successful. That is a year-on-year growth of 50%, which is around the same as in the US, actually, for last year, 55%. So it's a pretty major topic. And I suspect we all know that medical information is worth about 10 to 40 times credit card info on the dark web, which I haven't visited myself, of course, but I'm assured that's the case. And none of us want to be at the sharp end of this, right? The security and privacy of the patient's data that we're all entrusted with handling is absolutely paramount. So we have some incisive questions in this document around intrusion detection, including monitoring and pen testing. We cover the access management and password policies of vendors. And also from a management perspective, the security patching, the IT training and compliance arrangements that vendors have. So we can't guarantee that you'll be safer if you use this checklist, but we've certainly tried to help.
Thank you. I might just stop sharing my screen. At this point, obviously open to taking any questions from anybody. We'll obviously put out the more detailed framework in the next couple of weeks. Question to this group on how to use this guide and when, and I'd love to hear different perspectives, right? So maybe Chris and Philip, as vendors, how do you suggest other vendors use this guide, when and in what form? Talk a bit about that flexible approach we've tried to take. And then I'd love to hear subsequently from Lorcan, Erwin, and Tim on the pharma point of view as well on how and when to use this guidance.
Yeah, I'll jump in by saying that this has been incredibly productive and effective, coming from my perspective as an early stage digital health company that is trying to develop digital biomarkers and keenly interested in working with pharma sponsors in this area. So this has been, an incredibly useful process to go through in collaboration for us to help prepare as we're coming out of stealth mode, to make sure that we've got everything buttoned up and we have clear understanding of what all the expectations are in working with partners in a really efficient way, right? So that we can really reduce cycles and be more successful in our sales cycles.
I would fully echo that, Chris. I mean, I think just the very spirit with which everybody in this group approached it is really encouraging, because at no point did I actually feel, oh, this must be Tim speaking from the big bad pharma perspective, or this is Chris, battling it for the little guy on the vendor side. It's just never felt like that. And I think that's what we need as much as we can of, because at the end of the day, we all are part of the same ecosystem. I think we all do want to try and achieve the same thing. And I would suggest when it comes to kind of, sponsor vendor dialogue, that both sides try to use these kinds of tools and say, look, I don't know if it's perfect, it probably isn't, but for the sake of both sides' efficiency and navigating each of our challenges, for us on the vendor side, it's really difficult, right? We by definition don't have huge resources, and having to recut things slightly differently 1,000 times, or worse still, very significantly differently, just isn't feasible. Similarly, I think I have a lot of sympathy for people who sit within large organizations like Novartis or J&J or AstraZeneca, because they're very hard to, I understand that, right? It also has a lot of stakeholders involved. So the more we can cut through this, the better.
Yeah, I can jump in from our side. Having both sides on the same page is likely to be a very large resource saver, because right now it can often take 6 months easily to get through this process, and cutting that time in half. So 6 months easily, it can take more. And there are a lot of cases it takes more. If you cut that time in half, that is a real saving in time, and time is very valuable in the drug development process. Imagine saving a couple of months on clinical trial startup, and the whole progression for a single drug program. That's a lot of value there.
What I can say as well, from our perspective, is that we see, that we engage with these vendors, and we want to be as flexible as possible, right? But we're large organizations with people from many different areas. And so while my team is a team of digital health experts, and we tend to speak the same language, when we bring in the rest of the Novartis machinations around us, they don't necessarily speak that digital health language, right? So for example, if we're bringing in and starting to engage with those procurement and onboarding folks, they don't necessarily know the questions to begin to ask. And we've worked with them over the past few years to start to detail out, well, what do we need to be careful about, and how does this link into the other parts of Novartis, for example, do we take a medical device approach, which I think we can all agree here that a medical device approach isn't the correct approach, which is why we've created this document to put this together. So I think this is one of the really good kind of guidances that we can have, because we can engage them with our own procurement colleagues and figure out, okay, how do we onboard this? What are the right questions to ask? Are we sure that we're ticking off everything that we need to be careful about? And to come back to Tim's point earlier as well, what comes back to us doesn't need to be perfect here. If there are pieces here that are that lack clarity, we will not be shy in going back and asking further questions back to the teams here, right? So this is really just the start off and the kickoff framework to be able to advance those discussions, and again, take it hopefully from 6 months down to something a little bit shorter than 6 months.
Yeah, maybe to add to that as well, Lorcan from the J&J side, I see that there is a lot of, I think, value in, let's say, collaborating from a digital health point of view, also with our internal procurement functions. Because I think what I see is that, what I assume that they must be thinking very often is that when such a digital health a sensor or a solution is being requested, it always looks like something very novel, something that doesn't really fit the existing categories. What I am personally hoping that this questionnaire is going to do is to sort of help to maybe standardize what they can expect in terms of information that are expected from suppliers, so that not every time the wheel is to be reinvented, I mean, that would be a great achievement if this can be a start to that.
Absolutely, thank you. Rachel, anything from your side? I think you kind of you're not on either side, but I think you're kind of a convening body like us.
Yeah, so I'm not on either side, but I have worked previously on both sides as a vendor and as big pharma. And so seeing from both sides where the headaches can be was really, my goal was to kind of, I think I said earlier, to prevent twitching from all colleagues and patients, right? So it's understandable how, different kinds of vendors will have a different body of evidence based upon how mature the technology is or whatever else too. What I see this guideline being particularly useful on top of what everyone just said was to just be upfront on both sides about what they can expect with the tool. How much evidence exists right now. That's great. Just share what's previous, what exists, so that the sponsor knows how to use it and how to build, and also collectively, build a body of evidence together. So the idea about this is just to share, so everyone at the very beginning can be aware of, what exists right now, what's required to use a really exciting tool. So there's no surprises along the way. I think what hurts, a relationship is those surprises that occur after a contract is signed when it's in the real world in the hands of patients. Those surprises are the biggest headaches. And hopefully something like this can help remove those headaches and help create more effective relationships.
Absolutely. I see some questions trickling in, so I'm going to just throw them out at the group here. From your point of view, what are the top categories, the most important ones that any vendor should answer to be considered by the sponsor? It's a hard one.
I mean, it's tough to say that any of these is, less important. These are all areas because, a lot of these digital health products, they are high value, but also high risk. You're collecting patient data in the remote setting. There's not necessarily going to be clinician oversight unless there's telemedicine behind it. So the whole package is critical. Does it fit with the intended use? It's a good place to start. But I don't think there's any part of this where you'd say, we'll let that slide. So you have to have good documentation behind there. But I think it was Philip who made the point, you don't have to get this all right, or maybe it was Irwin. You don't have to be right from the get-go. If there are questions, we'll follow up on it, and it's not an interrogation. It's really just understanding where you are. If there are gaps, we can work with you to close those. That's not where things go wrong. It's the surprises, like Rachel mentioned. That's where things can really go wrong. So if something comes up, it's just a conversation we'll have later.
Lorcan, did you want to come in?
No, I think Tim kind of answered that perfectly. Unfortunately, I think Chandana, this comes down to you and your team. You've kind of split this off really well between each of the different sections. So actually, I was looking through just the kind of different categories here, and I can't really see one that's more important than another. They are quite different. And actually, I think the way that the document itself is structured and the types of questions that are here, I think each of the vendors that go to fill this out will actually already have quite a strong detail without having to dig through everything of where they are. I think a few hours actually would really pull a lot of this together quite quickly.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I think in terms of the practical usage of this document, it's a simple Word doc. We have all the different categories. You can jump from a category to its relevant page. It's also a Word doc, so you can delete or omit questions that are not relevant to your use case. So really, you can take this entire guidance, maybe just 5 of 13 categories are what you're looking for at that point in time. And let's say within those categories, there's only a few questions that apply. So you could nearly customize this guidance to suit your use case at that point in time. And that's the whole point of structuring it in this manner. Okay, so next question. Although still in development, have any of you, pharma or vendors, started to deploy any of this approach for vendor selection?
I think in bits and pieces, right? I think that what was created here isn't anything that's particularly new. I think it's just stitched together in one place that everyone can be aware of. The things that are on here shouldn't be a surprise to any vendor, shouldn't be a surprise from any sponsor. It's just put in one kind of a place. So I think that a lot of these are being used, but the goal of this too is just to be really clear on what kind of language is being used and also what asks are. So I think a lot of these are currently being used. It's just put together in a really niceful way. So thanks Health Excel for getting us all together to do this.
I'll jump in and say, yeah, our assessment process reflects the topics that are here. But again, I think that if you were to go to any of the other panelists in their companies, they're also assessing these aspects of all the vendors. We're just reducing the differences in approaches so that, if you're on the vendor side, you can do this once or continually update and refine it as you have more and more discussions with sponsors. But you've already got documentation from the last engagement you had that you can just provide up front.
Thank you. What would you say to an early stage health tech startup that wants to perform an early stage study measuring ePros only? So assume this is clinically appropriate for the therapeutic area and has appropriate expertise to design or execute an early study, but cannot afford to hire an external vendor. Any suggestions to such a...
Do it yourself. No, but I mean, quite seriously, right? I mean, this is the whole point of this exercise, is to try and make it easier. And I mean, I think I understand where this question is coming from. You have to eke out your available resources and marshal them around the opportunities that are the most promising. And if you get presented with this tool or a vendor suggesting that you complete this, hopefully that's good news, because it means that you're steadily being helped around not having to get too many other third-party resources in to help you with this.
Yeah, I would echo that from my side as well. If we have some of these digital health startups that are looking to collect these types of basic data, these types of PRO data, if we go back to first principles here, do we need to collect this with an ePro, for example? Can we go back to pen and paper and scan it and send it across and store this data securely? So there are different mechanisms to try to do this. And I really understand the motivation behind this question, Joe. It's to try to keep this flexible and nimble, and to keep this cost efficient as well. So it's really trying to figure out what works for your particular situation. How do you ensure that you have the data adequately collected and appropriately collected? So I can completely echo your comments, Philip.
Next one, for efficiency, do you screen early for failure to meet absolute requirements before investing efforts in a comprehensive assessment?
From our side, what I can say is this depends on the actual study and what type of data we're looking to collect here, and which part of the organization we're working in. Where we're working in kind of our phase 3 registration studies, right? So these are places where everything is very strict and locked down. And this is where we need really mature vendors to work with. And if we're not working with very mature vendors, that's because the clinical need must be so strong within that space that we're really looking for something new and new ways to approach this. So in terms of, and our earlier stage organizations, they can be a little bit more flexible around it. When this comes down to how do we begin to engage those vendors, we use those types of guidances to figure out how we work with them. This means that it might mean that we need more stable more stable vendors and more robust engagements for some of our larger or later stage trials. And so this is where stuff like financial due diligences will take place when we begin to engage those vendors. And for other conditions, this is where we can be a little bit more flexible and really start to engage with those novel digital endpoints that we think are going to be transformational for our trials.
Yeah, I agree with what Lorcan said, and I think it points to what we said at the top, which is a lot of us are asking very similar questions and interpreting this in very similar ways. So standardizing, will save time on these kinds of assessments.
Yeah, and the question too, written in a way, kind of makes me a little bit worried about fail fast. So if vendors aren't able to answer every single question thoroughly, is that a red flag to not work with them? No. This guidance is not supposed to scare any group, right? It's really just so that we can all work together and just be upfront about what a vendor can provide at this moment right now for a specific need from a sponsor. I think Tim mentioned previously, if there's holes in this assessment, if you don't have as much information as you'd like to have right now, that's all right. We'll all work together in this big ecosystem to solve those questions. This guidance is not supposed to be something that's supposed to make working together more difficult. It's supposed to make it easier. So if there's some missing information from maybe an earlier stage vendor, that's okay. We'll all work together to get the information that we need.
I think that was really well put, Rachel. And that leads me to my next question. It's actually a really exciting one. I don't think I ever asked you the words. So during your discussions, were there any big eye-opening moments for any of you in building this assessment together with so many different stakeholders in the group? Erwin, go for it.
I wouldn't really call it an eye-opener, but I did sometimes make myself the consideration, what are we doing to those poor vendors? Yeah, with asking all of these questions. Yeah, and then I thought, well, on the other hand, I think there is nothing I think that we have now into the document that is there, not there for a reason. Yeah, so I think that there are, I mean, 13 sections, quite a lot. There are quite a lot of questions in there. Of course, it's up to everyone to sort of decide what is sort of the level of adoption that they want to do, whether they want to maybe first do it on something like an RFI with more limited questions, then to go to a more larger RFP with a little more questions. But I did make myself the thought, at least, that at least for a vendor, it mustn't always be easy to get the same questions over and over again. Yeah, and it was good to be walking in someone else's shoes for once.
I think from the other side, if I play that back, you know, what was quite encouraging to see is that at the end of the day, if you approach this smartly enough, there is only a finite number of things probably that are relevant to any given study. So again, if you approach it with an open mind and trying to focus on the essentials, even with this quite diverse working group over a long period of time and a lot of subjects to cover, at times I didn't know whether it felt like we would, but I think we've cracked at least a good portion of it, thanks to everyone's input and Chandana and team's excellent editorial efforts. But I think there is hope, because actually there is normally only so much that you should reasonably need to look at, and that's one eye-opening thing for me, at least, that, you know, when this kind of group comes together, you can get to at least the beginnings of a common denominator around these things.
Absolutely. I think we also recognize what's currently missing, or what are the frustrations, I think, from all sides in how this currently works. So yeah, I think it was an incredible learning experience anyway throughout, and even to just, there were so many technical things that we were like, okay, do we really want this extreme technicality here? Is that an essential? I think even just thinking through that, putting ourselves in the shoes of someone who would fill this out, it was really enriching. There's a lot of questions here around how we're gonna share this guidance document around and when. I'm happy to take a first stab, but again, would love inputs from everybody. So we launch this in 2 weeks from now. It's just undergoing a couple of final design elements and some edits as well. So in 2 weeks, it'll be sent to all of the attendees of this webinar by email. But we're also, this is an open source document that we want everybody to use and experience and give us feedback on as well if something's missing or it doesn't actually work in the real world, which we hope is not the case. It'll be hosted on the Health Excel website forever. It'll be hosted on all our social channels. We'll also share it around with the entire Health Excel community through our newsletters and mailing lists. And I know, Rachel, we're going to put it up on the DIME website as well. Would you maybe like to talk about that? And then for all of you, how do you envision it evangelizing this so that it goes far and wide?
Yeah, thanks for that, Chandana. So yes, we are DIME is thrilled to also socialize this really fantastic guidance for everyone. Just a quick shout out, if folks aren't super familiar, the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME, is the professional society for the space of digital medicine. So our mission is to advance a safe, effective, ethical, and equitable usage of digital medicine products to optimize human health. So from that, we'll do lots of different things. We will put it on our newsletter. We will put it, also share it through our social and also our internal Slack. We have a couple thousand members all throughout the world. And so we were happy to socialize this to get this out there, right? We're a professional society, including lots of different kinds of folks in the space of digital medicine, including lots of vendors, including all the big pharmas, patients, clinicians, everyone else too who's involved in it. So together, and with the help of everyone else on this team and on the call today, I think this can go far and wide.
Thank you, Rachel. And I'm assuming the rest of you will use it in your organizations, of course.
Yes.
There's one more really interesting question, and I see we have 5 minutes. I might squeeze this one here. Is there anything from a sponsor's point of view that you hope to see more of from vendors to accelerate and streamline the clinical process in the months and years to come, i.e., more collaborative efforts with CROs or other internal team members, consolidation of products onto a single platform, etc.?
Personally, what I would like to see is more questions about the user experience. How did we involve end users into the product development journey? That I think is incredibly useful, because if we don't know what patients actually will use, would want to use, enjoy using, we're really not creating products of value, I don't think. And so I think those kinds of questions, who has it been tested in? How do we know that these products are useful for folks? I think until we know that in the development stage, rolling it out in a clinical trial, or even, help a drug that's already been approved, perhaps isn't the most useful. From my standpoint, I'd love to see more questions about user experience and how that's worked so far.
Sponsor point of view?
I was just about to comment that I think there's lots of really good work that's coming through for this kind of field of digital biomarkers and digital endpoints. I think we're kind of at a turning point in the last maybe year. I know that Health Excel are really busy in this space. I know that Rachel, you guys are really busy in this space as well. And I know that some of the health authorities that we're engaging with are starting to see these digital biomarkers and digital endpoints more commonly within the trials. I think what this will all result in over the next few years is really strong guidance around what happens when we engage with health authorities around these digital endpoints. I think that what this will do is that it will drive consolidation of those technologies and of those measures themselves. I think that's really where we're going to start to see these being used more thoroughly, both across different indications and across the industry, both within a clinical development perspective, but also shifting over to a clinical practice perspective as well. So I think we're just at the start of this. We're going to see this getting really busy over the next while. Consolidation, I think, is coming down the road for a lot of this work. And that's where it's really going to get exciting over the next couple of years.
I'm really hopeful that this and other work around digital biomarkers, and as you say, Rachel, the patient centricity and generally the decentralization of both care and the diagnostics around care can lead us to a world where actually, the role of a formal trial becomes less important than measuring the real world safety and effectiveness on real people. And that's what I'm most excited about. And all this conversation around, is it safe? Is it efficacious? Moves into, is it actually effective for Jane or Joe or Jackie?
Well said, Philip. So next steps, what happens once we launch this? What do we intend to do as a group? Tim?
Yep. So, as far as the next steps go, I think basically, if you're working with me on the vendor side, don't be surprised to see this show up in your inbox or a request for that. We recognize that I think we did a very deliberative job on putting this together, but we recognize that we won't get it 100% right the first time around. And even if it's in a good place now, we want to continue to make it better. So please, send us feedback. Shandana, if I'm right, there's going to be a feedback location maintained by Health Excel. We'd love to hear from people who are using it. I'll certainly be providing the feedback that I get when I start to use this with vendors. And then, there are possibilities to extend this work in the future. And so if you're interested in taking part in the conversation, a great point of entry would be with Shandana. But otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to ping me there and get yourself joined in the party.
Wonderful. Well, we're just on the hour. I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you. It's been such a pleasure working with you, such a stimulating experience over the last 10 months or so. And I know we're not going anywhere. We'll be working together on other things, but incredibly proud of what we've put out there that we're going to launch in a couple of weeks. And thank you so much for all of your contribution into this. And thank you to everybody for joining as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you too.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.